Let me tell you something that almost no one has the courage to say. You will never have real power as long as you are afraid of being alone. It may seem like an exaggeration, it may even sound arrogant, but it's the plain truth. You can have followers, friends, contacts, partners, and still be fragile inside. Because those who depend on constant presence never develop their own structure. And Machiavelli already understood something that the modern world pretends not to see. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires internal strength before external influence. There's a convenient lie circulating out there. The more connected you are, the more powerful you are. But observe with a cool head. Those who are always available are rarely valued. Those who constantly need to be accepted never command respect. Better to be feared than loved isn't about intimidating people, it's about not being easily replaceable. And it all begins with loneliness. If you want real power, not the appearance of virtue, not momentary validation, not cheap applause, you need to learn how to turn silence into strategy. You need to learn to use solitude as a forge. Because the end justifies the means when the means is to build emotional sovereignty. Virtue and fortune favor those who can endure their own silence without falling apart. And perhaps the question that will bother you now is simple. Are you avoiding being alone? Or are you avoiding discovering who you really are? If something inside you awakened while listening, don't ignore that feeling. This channel isn't about videos, it's about memories. Remember who you were before the fear, before the exhaustion, before the silence. Each new video here is a different reflection of your own soul, an invitation to understand what the world never taught you. The power you seek outside has always been within you. If you feel that this journey speaks to what lives silently within you, sign up now. Not to follow yet another creator, but to reconnect with something the world tried to make you forget. Because here, every word was made to heal, each reflection to awaken, and each video serves as a reminder. You are not alone on the path back to yourself. Click on subscribe and turn the algorithm into a daily reminder of who you really are. He learned early on that loneliness hurts, but it also builds you up. And here's the point that almost no one dares to face. Being alone is not punishment. It's a process of self-improvement. Most people interpret silence as abandonment, when in fact it can be an invisible form of training. Machiavelli understood something essential about power. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, begins within one's own mind. Those who rely too much on applause never develop inner strength. And without structure, there is no virtue and fortune to sustain someone in the game of life. He realizes that when he stops chasing after companionship, he begins to hear his own thoughts more clearly. At first it's strange, almost uncomfortable, but discomfort is the price of construction. The end justifies the means, when the means is to strengthen oneself from within. In this context, loneliness ceases to be a punishment and becomes a tool. It's like entering an invisible gym, where the muscle being trained is consciousness itself. There he begins to understand that better to be feared than loved isn't about intimidating people. It's about not depending on them emotionally. And that changes everything, because when he learns to tolerate his own presence, something begins to silently transform. He begins to realize that those who can't stand being alone end up accepting any company. Accept fragile friendships, mediocre relationships, bad business deals. And this happens because he never developed his own loyal armies within himself. Discipline, focus, self-control. Without these internal armies, any external opinion becomes a command. And so he ends up reacting, never leading. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who demonstrate excessive need lose social weight. It's hard to hear, but it's true. Constant adaptability begins when he stops blaming the world and adopts his own isolation as a strategy. He could, for example, establish a simple ritual. 2 hours a day without a cell phone, without notifications, just reading and reflection. You can start with books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, or even The Prince by Machiavelli, to understand the real game of relationships. This type of practice may not seem revolutionary, but it builds sovereignty. And sovereignty is different from arrogance. It is silent firmness. It is the calculated use of force applied first to oneself. And those who learn this stop begging for attention. The truth is that the system teaches that being alone is a sign of failure. But that's just the appearance of virtue sold as a social rule. He discovers that many people live surrounded by things and yet feel empty because they never spent enough time with themselves to know who they really are. Solitude, when chosen, becomes a laboratory of identity. He begins to write down goals, review mistakes, and analyze decisions with a cool head. Ask yourself, where am I giving in out of fear? Where am I seeking validation? And he realizes that avoiding being hated is different from seeking approval. Strategy is one thing, emotional submission is another. In this process, he begins to feel something curious: independence. And independence generates magnetism, because those who don't chase after their goals end up being chased. But this change requires understanding a crucial detail about isolation, and not all isolation is strengthening. He needs to understand one thing before continuing. Not all isolation is strength. There is the isolation of the coward, and there is the isolation of the strategist. Machiavelli never advocated fleeing out of fear, but rather politics guided by reality, not by ideals, and that completely changes the game. The coward hides because he fears confrontation. The strategist withdraws because he is preparing his next move. The difference is invisible to those looking from the outside, but brutal to those who live it from the inside. One builds walls out of insecurity. The other side constructs silence in order to recalibrate power. The end justifies the means when the means is to gain clarity before acting. He realizes that the strength of the weak is a prison, but the strong man's laboratory is an incubator. Virtue and fortune favor those who know when to appear, and especially when to disappear, because constant presence trivializes value. Strategic absence creates weight. He begins to observe his own behavior. When someone withdraws, is it out of fear of judgment or for the purpose of growth? This question is uncomfortable, but necessary. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who avoid conflict tend to isolate themselves out of resentment. Those who take time off to study, plan, and grow, however, return stronger. This is where the calculated use of force applied to social energy itself comes in. He can, for example, reduce superficial encounters and use that time to develop strategic skills. Learn basic finance with The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. Study persuasive communication using How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie, but with a critical eye. Or even start a silent project that no one knows you're building. Your own loyal armies are not just people, they are skills. Those who develop skills don't beg for space. Better to be feared than loved in this context means being respected for consistency. And consistency is born behind the scenes. He also notices something subtle. The isolation of the weak breeds bitterness. The isolation of the fort generates expansion. A feigned virtue is pretending to need some time while shirking one's own responsibility. Strategic isolation means saying little, working hard, and coming back different. Avoiding being hated remains prudent, but not at the cost of one's own evolution. Constant adaptability requires knowing when the environment is draining more than it is adding. If he spends more time justifying choices than executing plans, he might be in the wrong place. And when he learns to leave without drama, without announcement, without scandal, something happens. The atmosphere is starting to feel the absence, and absence, when used well, communicates value without words. But before he can master that, he needs to overcome a bigger obstacle, because the fear of loneliness doesn't spring from nowhere. It was planted. He begins to realize that the fear of being alone wasn't something he was born with. It was instilled in him. From a young age, they were taught that being alone is a sign of social failure. If you don't have many friends, something is wrong. If you spend a lot of time alone, you need to socialize. But no one explains that this discourse keeps people too busy to think, and those who don't think consume. Machiavelli understood that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires seeing the system as it is, not as others say it is. The modern economy needs constant distraction. Notifications, series, events, noise, artificial urgency, because silence breeds reflection, and reflection breeds autonomy, and autonomy reduces manipulation. The end justifies the means when the means is to keep you too busy to question. He realizes that loneliness threatens structures that depend on conformity. Virtue and fortune favor those who manage to escape the noise, but the noise was designed to be addictive. He observes his own day. How many times do you pick up your phone just to avoid feeling silent? How many times do you accept invitations just to avoid seeming antisocial? Decisions based on real human nature show that the fear of exclusion activates the survival instinct. The brain interprets rejection as ancestral danger, and the system exploits that. The appearance of virtue is pretending to be connected while feeling empty inside. He starts testing something simple, an entire Sunday offline. No social media, no digital validation. At first there's anxiety, then clarity. He becomes aware of thoughts that were buried. He perceives desires that were not his own. They belonged to the environment. The calculated use of force here means resisting the impulse to fill all silence. He then understands that avoiding being hated has often become synonymous with constantly pleasing others. Constantly trying to please others keeps superficial relationships functioning. But it doesn't build depth. Constant adaptability requires recognizing when the environment has shaped your identity. He begins to form his own loyal armies when he learns to say no to distractions. He realizes that many criticize solitude because they have never been able to face their own minds, and this reveals something unsettling. Perhaps the problem isn't being alone. Perhaps the problem is that he never learned to enjoy his own company. When he realizes this, he starts questioning everything, and it is at this point that a powerful revelation emerges. Great ideas rarely emerge in crowds. He begins to notice a curious pattern in the story. The ideas that changed the world almost never originated in noisy parties. Nietzsche wrote a good portion of his reflections while walking alone in the mountains. Newton developed revolutionary theories during his isolation during the plague. Darwin developed his ideas through long periods of silent reflection. Kafka wrote at night, detached from the world. It wasn't an escape, it was concentration. Machiavelli understood that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires observing the world with strategic distance. Distance creates perspective. Perspective creates original thought. The end justifies the means when the means is to depart from consensus in order to see the invisible. Virtue and fortune do not favor distracted minds. They favor those who can tolerate the discomfort of silence, because it is in silence that the mind begins to organize the chaos. He realizes that creativity doesn't stem from hyperconnectivity. It arises from internal conflict. Decisions based on real human nature show that the brain needs productive downtime to generate insights. Without it, he only reacts to external stimuli. The calculated use of force, here, means protecting one's own focus as if it were sacred territory. He can create a simple ritual, walking for 30 minutes a day without music, just thinking, or keep an ideas notebook, recording thoughts that arise in solitude. You can read Thus Spoke Zarathustra by Nietzsche or Walden by Thoreau to understand the power of conscious retreat. Own and loyal armies include intellectual discipline. Those who develop mental discipline do not depend on the approval of the majority. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, means having ideas that challenge the status quo, and that requires courage to think for oneself. He begins to realize that the crowd offers comfort, but rarely offers originality. The appearance of virtue is repeating popular opinions to avoid conflict. But avoiding being hated cannot mean abandoning one's own vision. Constant adaptability is not about conforming to the masses, it's about evolving without losing your identity. When he learns to support his own thoughts, something changes in his attitude. Conversations cease to be about seeking validation and become strategic exchanges. He starts talking less and saying more. And interestingly, the less he tries to impress, the greater the impact he makes, because depth doesn't shout, it's heavy. But if solitude generates original thought, it also stirs up something more delicate. She exposes vulnerabilities that he may have avoided for years. He begins to notice a troubling detail. Those who can't stand being alone end up trading away their own dignity. Accepts emotional crumbs, tolerates disrespect, closes bad deals just to avoid losing company. And this is not moral weakness. It's disguised emotional dependence. Machiavelli already warned that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires understanding human nature as it is. And human nature respects those who don't beg for permanence. The end justifies the means when the means is to rebuild one's autonomy before demanding respect. Better to be feared than loved here means being perceived as someone who might leave, because those who can leave negotiate better. Those who need to stay accept any condition. In this field, having your own loyal armies consists of self-esteem, purpose, and financial stability. Without these pillars, he enters relationships like an invisible beggar, and beggars are rarely valued. Virtue and fortune favor those who do not depend on a single environment to survive. Dependency creates submission. Independence creates magnetism. He observes simple examples. An employee who possesses rare skills and financial reserves communicates differently with their boss. A partner who has their own life and personal goals won't fall apart for emotional crumbs. Decisions based on real human nature show that perceived scarcity increases value. The calculated use of force means knowing when to withdraw your presence when there is disrespect. Not with drama, not with threats, but with poise. He can, for example, set clear boundaries. Not responding to offensive messages, not accepting invitations that disrespect his schedule, not tolerating recurring irony. You can invest in professional development, learning fluent English, studying investments, developing digital skills. The more repertoire he has, the less he depends on a single source of validation or income. And when that happens, the dynamic changes, because whoever knows you don't need them starts to respect you more. The appearance of virtue is pretending that everything is fine in order to maintain a superficial peace. But avoiding being hated doesn't mean accepting being belittled. Constant adaptability requires adjusting posture as the environment reveals intentions. He begins to understand that many relationships were sustained only because he was afraid of being alone. And when that fear disappears, some people naturally distance themselves. This is not a loss, it's filtering. Those who stay learn to respect boundaries. Those who leave reveal that they were only there for convenience. And he discovers something powerful. Voluntary solitude is better than forced companionship. But to turn that into a real strategy, he he needs to learn a specific technique. He's beginning to understand that disappearing sometimes communicates more than 1,000 arguments. Machiavelli never spoke of power as constant noise, but as precise calculation. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, teaches that excessive presence trivializes value. Those who are always available cease to be desired. Those who respond instantly never create expectations. The end justifies the means when the means is to regain social weight through absence. Better to be feared than loved, in this context, is to be respected for one's own scarcity. And scarcity isn't declared, it's demonstrated. He realizes that by reducing unnecessary interactions, he begins to generate curiosity. People notice the silence. They ask where he is. They miss him. Calculated use of force means leaving before your presence becomes an ignored routine. Virtue and fortune favor those who know when to retire, because strategic withdrawal is not escape. It's repositioning. He can apply this in a practical way. If you're always initiating conversations, you could try waiting. If you're always explaining too much, you could try summarizing. If you publish content daily seeking validation, you can create cycles of planned pauses. Decisions based on real human nature show that absence creates projection. When you disappear, people fill the void with their imagination. In this case, having your own loyal armies means self-control and emotional discipline. It's not easy not to respond immediately. It's not easy not to have to justify yourself. But whoever masters this impulse masters their own worth. Constant adaptability means realizing when you are offering too much and adjust. No drama, no announcement. Without public justification. A feigned virtue is saying, "I don't care," but continuing to monitor reactions. A true strategic withdrawal is a genuine shutdown. Avoiding being hated remains prudent, but not at the cost of becoming predictable. He understands that excessive predictability reduces impact, and impact is social currency. When he returns after a period of quiet construction, he comes back changed, firmer, more focused, rarer, and the environment notices. But this technique requires something even deeper. He needs to have enough inner richness to sustain his own silence. He begins to realize that the true test of loneliness is not external, it's internal. Schopenhauer said that those who are rich on the inside can better tolerate their own company, and that completely changes the logic. Because if he needs constant noise, maybe he's running away from something. Machiavelli understood that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, begins with raw self-knowledge. Not that pretty one with motivational quotes, but the one that reveals insecurities, envy, hidden impulses. The end justifies the means when the means is to confront one's own shadow. Virtue and fortune favor those who develop a solid inner world. Those who lack inner substance live by parasitizing external stimuli, and this creates an invisible dependency. Better to be feared than loved at this level means being self-sufficient enough not to beg for distractions. The calculated use of force is applied against one's own impulses to flee. And this is one of the most difficult training sessions. He begins to test something simple yet powerful. Replace an hour of social media with deep reading. You could start with The Art of Being Right by Schopenhauer or Letters to a Young Poet by Rilke. Not to appear cultured, but to strengthen one's own thinking. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who develop an intellectual repertoire increase their emotional autonomy. Own and loyal armies include a mental library. They include the ability to have a dialogue with oneself. He can keep a strategic diary, recording patterns of behavior. You can note where you reacted out of fear and where you acted out of conviction. Constant adaptability arises from this type of analysis. And gradually, he begins to enjoy his own company, not because he became a hermit, but because it built density. The appearance of virtue is feigning depth while avoiding true silence. Avoiding being hated might maintain superficial relationships, but it doesn't create inner greatness. He begins to realize that many people spend their lives socializing in order to avoid facing emptiness. And when they are left alone, they become anxious. This reveals a lack of internal structure. When he learns to spend hours alone without needing distractions, something changes. The mind slows down, thoughts become organized, the priorities are clear, and he understands that loneliness is not absence, it's space to rebuild. But reconstruction requires a process. He now understands that solitude by itself doesn't transform anyone. What transforms her is what he does with her. There is a silent, almost alchemical process that separates those who merely suffer from isolation from those who transform it into sovereignty. Machiavelli knew that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires method, not uncontrolled emotion. And method implies steps. The end justifies the means when the means is to go through each stage with discipline. Virtue and fortune favor those who respect the process, and the first stage is recognition. He needs to admit that he's afraid of being alone. No excuses, no pretty story. Decisions based on real human nature show that denying fragility only strengthens it in the shadows. Recognition is facing the mirror without psychological makeup. And that already eliminates half the weight, because the one who is appointed loses some of the power. The second stage is excavation. Here, he begins to investigate patterns. Why do you accept invitations you don't want? Why tolerate subtle disrespect? Calculated use of force means directing energy towards strategic analysis, not self-pity. He can write down 3 questions every night. Where was I authentic today? Where did I negate myself? Where did I give in out of fear? Self-made and loyal armies begin to form through this type of daily practice. Constant adaptability stems from honest observation. Without excavation, it repeats cycles. Through digging, he begins to see invisible structures. And when he can see, he can decide differently. It's better to be feared than loved here. Fearing the loss of one's own essence is more important than losing external approval. This stage is uncomfortable, but it is within this context that identity begins to solidify. The third stage is integration. He accepts that there is light and shadow. The appearance of virtue ceases to be a priority. Authenticity becomes the priority. Avoiding being hated remains strategic, but not at any cost. He learns to defend his opinions without aggression, learn to say no without guilt. And then comes the fourth stage, construction. Now he uses his alone time to develop something concrete. It could be a digital project, a new skill, a financial reserve, or a physical transformation. Isolation becomes a workshop, and the workshop produces results. When he returns to the world, he is no longer the same. But there's something curious about the story. Great men have been pushed into solitude before choosing to transform it. He begins to realize that strategic solitude is not a modern productivity theory. It's a historical pattern. Dante was exiled from Florence and in forced isolation wrote the Divine Comedy. Seneca endured political exile and transformed adversity into practical stoicism. Thoreau retired to Walden Pond not to escape the world, but to understand it better. None of them romanticized suffering. They converted him. Machiavelli, in fact, wrote some of his political reflections after being removed from power. Politics guided by reality, not by ideals, has never been comfortable. The end justifies the means when the means is to transform exclusion into construction. Virtue and fortune did not smile upon them immediately, but they smiled at the consistency. Decisions based on real human nature show that adversity reveals structure, and the structure strengthens under pressure. Better to be feared than loved in this context means leaving a legacy that transcends immediate approval. He observes that all these men had something in common. They did not waste their exile with resentment. Calculated use of force was applied to the pain itself. His ideas, his discipline, and his intellectual output were his own loyal armies. Constant adaptability allowed them to transform social rejection into a strategic advantage. He can apply this today. Did you miss an opportunity? Instead of complaining, you could invest in your skills. Just got out of a relationship. You can use the time to strengthen your body and mind. Feeling left out? You could study financial markets, learn programming, or develop fluent English. The appearance of virtue is posting about overcoming challenges. True transformation is working in silence. Avoiding being hated might be wise, but avoiding growth for fear of judgment is self-sabotage. When he looks at history, he understands loneliness can be imposed. But the answer to that is choice. He also realizes something essential. None of these men remained isolated forever. The retreat was a strategic phase. The return was inevitable. And when they returned, they came back with intellectual weight, with authority built in silence. Machiavelli knew that power is not an event, it is a process. Virtue and fortune favor those who use periods of retraction as preparation. Isolation, then, ceases to be a final point and becomes a strategic comma. He's beginning to understand that he doesn't need to wait for forced exile. You can choose your own conscious retreat. You can create your own symbolic Walden, even if you live in a big city. But knowing how to use this requires deliberate practice. He already understands the theory. Now comes the part that separates the curious from the builders. Because loneliness without a method turns into melancholy. But solitude with structure becomes a strategic weapon. Machiavelli taught that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires calculated action. The end justifies the means when the means is to use isolation to gain a competitive advantage. Virtue and fortune do not appear for those who merely reflect, they favor those who act. So he transforms solitude into ritual. Set fixed times for studying and physical training. Create clear weekly goals. Track your progress in a spreadsheet or journal. Calculated use of force means directing energy towards high-impact skills. You can learn basic investing, study fundamental analysis, and open an account with a reputable brokerage firm. You can take a course in communication, digital marketing, or advanced English. Having one's own loyal armies is a skill accumulated in silence. He also learns to choose intellectual company. If you are physically alone, you don't have to be mentally empty. Read Machiavelli's The Prince with a strategic eye. Read Marcus Aurelius' Meditations to strengthen emotional discipline. Read biographies of leaders who faced rejection before achieving recognition. Decisions based on real human nature show that those who consume shallow content develop shallow thinking. Constant adaptability means revising what enters the mind. The appearance of virtue is posting motivational quotes. Real growth comes from deep study. He can establish a simple rule: for every hour of entertainment, 2 hours of construction. You can use distraction-blocking apps. You can review your financial and physical goals weekly. It is better to be feared than loved. In this sense, one must be respected for one's own visible evolution. Visible progress stems from invisible discipline. He also understands the importance of strategic re-emergence. Eternal retreat becomes unproductive isolation. Avoiding being hated isn't about disappearing forever. It's about coming back stronger. He chooses specific moments to reappear with concrete news, new project, new skill, new stance, without fanfare, without justification. No need for excessive explanation. The impact speaks for itself, and when people ask what has changed, he just smiles. because he knows that power was built behind the scenes. But there is one essential precaution to take before completing this journey. Not all solitude is sovereign. Now he needs to face the question that separates strategy from escape. Is he building or is he hiding? This is the fine line that many ignore. Machiavelli never confused calculation with cowardice. Politics guided by reality, not ideals, demands brutal honesty with oneself. The end justifies the means, but only when the means generate real growth. If isolation is producing discipline, focus and clarity, then it is sovereignty. If it's producing resentment, procrastination and fear, it's pathological withdrawal. Virtue and fortune favor those who use silence as a tool, not as a permanent shelter. Better to be feared than loved doesn't mean becoming inaccessible due to trauma. It means being respected for internal consistency. The calculated use of force here is directed against self-sabotage. He observes, is it evolving or simply avoiding confrontation? Are loyal and dedicated armies being formed, or are they simply rusting? This self-assessment is essential. He can administer a simple test. Have you learned anything new in the last 30 days? Has he improved physically? Did it make financial progress? Have you refined your communication skills? Decisions based on real human nature show that growth leaves concrete traces. If there is no measurable progress, perhaps isolation is a disguised escape. Constant adaptability requires correcting course when stagnation is perceived. The appearance of virtue is saying, I'm focused on myself, while spending hours on quiet distractions. Avoiding being hated cannot become an excuse to avoid necessary exposure. Because leadership at some point requires a return to the field, sovereign solitude prepares for a powerful presence. Pathological withdrawal creates a fear of reappearing. Constant fear has never been a strategy for power. He is beginning to understand that sovereignty is not eternal absence. It's the ability to choose when to be alone and when to be present. It's about having control over one's own emotional agenda. Machiavelli knew that those who cannot control themselves can hardly control their circumstances. Virtue and fortune align when there is a balance between introspection and action. He realizes that the cycle is clear: retreat, construction, return, influence, and then another retreat, like a strategic tide. He stops fearing silence and starts using it. Stop running away from the world and start entering it by choice. And when it enters with force, because he learned something that few people learn. Real power begins when you stop being afraid of your own company. Now let me really tease you. After everything you've heard, will you continue to treat loneliness as an enemy? Or will you start using it as a strategic weapon? Because true power doesn't come from the approval of the crowd. It is born from invisible discipline. It is born when you choose silence instead of desperately seeking validation. Machiavelli understood that politics guided by reality, not by ideals, requires emotional detachment. And emotional coldness begins when you don't rely on applause to act. Simple question: if everyone around you disappeared today, would you still know who you are? Would it still have direction? Would it still be relevant? Or is your identity too dependent on the gaze of others? Decisions based on true human nature show that those who fear solitude fear their own depth. But those who learn to master it build their own loyal armies within themselves, and these armies sustain any personal empire. So here's the challenge. Set aside a strategic period of conscious isolation. Build something, develop a skill, strengthen your body, improve your mind. Calculated use of force against one's own impulses to flee. Avoiding being hated might be wise, but avoiding growth is unforgivable. Virtue and fortune favor those who prepare while others are distracted. And when you return to the world, return a changed person. Rarer, more solid, more impossible to ignore. If this content resonated with you, comment below. Are you afraid of loneliness or afraid of who might become lonely? And if you want to continue learning about strategy, power, and inner building in the style of Machiavelli, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the game isn't about looking strong. It's about becoming strong, even when no one is watching.